Hi everyone, we're the Dream Team. I'm Ava.
I'm Alessandra.
I'm
I'm
Angelina.
I'm Cassandra.
And I'm Luca.
Today we'll be diving into group dynamics between musical bands and the role of communication leading to success or failure amongst the band. The two bands that we're going to discuss today are the Rolling Stones and One Directions.
What is leadership? Leadership is basically about influence. It's helping people understand what needs to get done, how to do it, and guiding the group so everyone can work towards the same goal. Good leadership matters because it keeps a group focused, organized, and able to solve problems more efficiently. When a group has strong leadership, everyone knows their roles and things just run a lot smoother.
So our first band is the Rolling Stones. The group's original members consist of Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Brian Jones, Charlie Watts, and Bill Wyman. They were formed in London in 1962, and they've been together to this day and for 60 years. They produce rock and roll and R&B tracks, and they have won a bunch of awards. Those includes Grammys and Billboard Awards, and they have sold over 250 million albums. Like many bands, they've experienced their hardships, which include drug and alcohol addiction and deaths of members. With this said, they still remain strong. Wait, you're mute, Ava.
Thank you. Now we'll talk about One Direction and how they became a group. In 2010, Louis Tomlinson, Niall Horan, Liam Payne, and Zayn Malik auditioned for X Factor individually. The judges felt that they would be better off as a group, which led Simon Cowell to sign their group to his record label. After the competition ended, the group was signed to Cisco Records, and One Direction became a British-Irish boy band that was adored by the public. In 2011, the band released their first album, Up All Night, which featured pop rock, dance pop, teen pop, and power pop lyrics. Their music focused on being young, relationships, heartbreak, and even empowerment. The band produced 5 albums together, sold 70 million records, and won over 200 awards both separately and together. Due to burnout and the desire for individual careers and growth, the band split apart in 2015. Members of the band went on to have their own individual careers and produce music without having to hold other members back or to certain standards. Fans were immensely saddened when the band broke up and to this day cherish One Direction as a group. So now that we've discussed who the Rolling Stones are and what One Direction was, let's take a look at why the Rolling Stones was a successful group and why One Direction failed.
To start off, we are going to compare group dynamics. Even though both groups were extremely successful, the way they were formed and how they functioned as teams were completely different. Starting off with the Rolling Stones, they formed more organically. Their relationship developed naturally over many years, and because of that, they built a very deep level of trust within each other. Each member eventually settled into a clear and stable role. For example, Mick Jagger became the frontman, and Keith Richards took on more of a creative lead. Because they had such a long shared history, they were able to handle conflict internally. They typically solved disagreements through negotiation and communication, and sometimes those disagreements even fueled their creativity. The strong foundation gave them a good structure, which is why they've been able to stay together for over 50 years. Moving into One Direction, they were formed pretty differently. They were put together through a competitive show, which meant their relationship developed quickly and under a lot of pressure. Their roles weren't as naturally developed, and instead, many of their responsibilities were assigned by management, and those roles continued to shift as each member grew individually. Even though they formed a strong emotional bond, the trust within the group was often influenced or managed by the industry around them and the media. Conflict for One Direction came from a lot of external pressure, such as fame, public stress, and the members' desire to start solo careers. Because their foundation wasn't as long-term or self-defined, they were more fragile and didn't have like a good trusting structure. So this ultimately contributed to the group's breakup and their solo careers. Overall, the Rolling Stones show what happens when a group grows more organically with long-term trust, while One Direction highlights challenges when a group is formed quickly and under pressure. These differences show how groups' structures and relationship can impact communication, teamwork, and ultimately longevity. Moving into leadership, One Direction was mainly managed from the outside, especially in the beginning. Simon Cowell, who formed the group, and a lot of label executives made most of the decisions about their music, branding, and their public image. Unlike the Rolling Stones, the member themselves didn't have much control or leadership early on. There wasn't one leader within the group, even though Harry Styles was often the front person. A lot of behind the scenes stuff was done by other members, and it was more spread out leadership roles, but limited because management was still the one making major decisions. Their creative direction was heavily influenced by producers and management, which means they didn't have much freedom. As the members got older, they started wanting more individual and creative control, which pulled them in different directions, especially as many of them became invested in solo careers. When it came to the Rolling Stones, um, I talked about it. Okay. The Rolling Stones often succeeded with a naturally developed and shared leadership system, while One Direction struggled under management control.
Comparing the roles and responsibilities, for the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger was seen as the lead vocalist and the songwriter. Keith Richards was a guitarist and songwriter. Brian Jones played the guitar and other instruments, and he organized a lot of the band. Charlie Watts was a drummer. Bill Wyman was the bass guitar. For One Direction, Liam Payne was the vocalist and the organizer. Louis Tomlinson was the vocalist and songwriter. Zayn Malik was a vocalist. Harry Styles was the lead vocalist in the group and Niall Horan was a vocalist and a guitarist. So, comparing decision making for the Rolling Stones, the group often came to decisions led by the Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, who were the leaders. This included the finance, tours, and business decisions. The rest of the members having a leader guiding them on these important decisions really helped build up their strong success as a group. For One Direction, the group was initially brought up by Simon Cowell, and he's the one who signed them on to his record label, so he really made the decisions. Later on, each group member would put their own opinions in on important decisions and came up with their own plans. This is a quote I found. It says, "This is a statistic decision-making process in which disagreement among members is ignored in order to achieve consensus in the group." Meaning, if One Direction's fallout could have possibly been avoided if all group members felt seen and heard and were comfortable sharing their thoughts.
For this slide, I I compared how two bands, One Direction and the Rolling Stones, handled conflict. Starting with One Direction, they dealt with a lot of internal tension like exhaustion, personal differences, and each person growing into different directions. Zayn leaving in 2015 was a big moment. He said he wanted privacy and later admitted he wanted to go solo. The other four continued for a little while, but eventually the stress caught up to them and they went on an indefinite hiatus in 2016. So overall, their way of resolving conflict was basically to separate and move on individually instead of trying to work through the issues as a group. For the Rolling Stones, they handled conflict very differently. Even though they've had decades of ups and downs, they're always prioritized staying together. Keith has said that their longevity comes from wanting to stick together and realizing they're more creative as a group. They rely on strong group chemistry, shared purpose, and accepting each other's personalities, even when they clash. Instead of breaking up, they adapt by replacing members, changing roles, and continuing as a team. Yeah.
So this slide covers how each band handled creativity and working together. So the Rolling Stones were very artist driven, They wrote most of their own songs and experimented with different sounds over the years. They formed naturally as musicians, so their creativity came from, playing music together and sharing different ideas. They also pushed musical boundaries and stayed together long enough to grow creatively for decades. One Direction had a much different setup. Early on, most of their songs were written by outside writers and producers, so they didn't have a ton of creative control at first. Since they were formed on the X Factor, their collaboration started more like a structured industry-led process instead of something organic. They did experiment more later on, but their time as a group was short, which limited how much they could develop creatively. They had good relationships overall, but individual goals eventually led them to split up. So the Stones had long-term creative growth, while One Direction had a more short-term collaboration.
When considering closeness, you must think about verbal and nonverbal communication. Verbal and nonverbal communication are key specifically during rehearsals, songwriting, and performances. Bands with open, respectful dialogue tend to maintain stronger collaboration and exhibit effective group communication. According to Comer and Holbrook, different bands that exhibit exemplify key concepts affecting task groups, including conflict, group cohesiveness, task and maintenance roles, norms, and group effectiveness. There are many factors that allow for a group to function effectively, and when members are respected, collaboration and communication is encouraged, and a group is able to be stronger and more successful together. Pierce explains that social connections can be either relational, whereby an individual can define themselves in terms of their personal relationships with specific others, or social connections can be collective to a group or social category rather than to individual group members. When looking at One Direction, we can notice how towards the end of their relationship, the social connection between the members was lost, as members desired solo careers, which led to the closeness and chemistry to be lost and eventually led to the downfall of One Direction. On the other hand, members have expressed great gratitude and appreciation for each other, which has allowed for strong connection and collaboration while the group lasted. Pierce also mentions how groups can be based on common identity, where members bond collectively to share social identity, or based on common bonds, where members from personal relationships with each other based on interpersonal attraction and may secondarily develop a group identity to reflect this. This is similar to the Rolling Stones, and that their interest in their brotherhood and love for blues music caused their group to remain united still to this day. Although One Direction didn't form because of their brotherhood and were placed together as a group by X Factor judges, they were still united as a group, which caused them to feel closer to their collective group significantly more quickly than individuals engaging in non-singing activities with a group context. The Rolling Stones members fostered the idea that they were better together because of their love for blues music. Despite the public feuds, the band has expressed a deep bond throughout the band that represents their connection as brothers. Overall, without closeness and connection, groups don't have a relationship, which in return causes failure. When looking at communication styles, it is important to look at how bands engage with fans, media, producers, and management. Bands must act as a team and require clear, consistent messages and representation of themselves. Both the Rolling Stones and One Direction made great attempts to interact with their fans and made sure to make in-person connections. They were both present throughout social media and offered fans once-in-a-lifetime concert experiences. While the Rolling Stones promoted individualism, social commentary, and the darker aspects of human nature throughout a variety of albums, One Direction fostered the idea of love and friendship with a sense of activism towards certain global issues. According to Baxter, Moore, and Kitts, when conflicts arise in bands, managers and producers tend to be the ones to deal with issues, often resolving conflicts before the chemistry of the bands can be altered. If members of the band don't engage effectively with members and producers, conflicts are unable to be dealt with and members won't communicate effectively. When considering One Direction, we see that when conflicts arose between members, less communication occurred, and as communication diminished, identities became questioned and relationships were affected for the worse, causing the group to eventually split. Even though Rolling Stones experienced a number of conflicts, the bands maintained communication and their brotherhood was able to be stronger than their conflicts, which allowed the band to continue on and still be around to this day. Overall, we were able to look at how the Rolling Stones and One Direction were effective enough to both be successful bands, even if they only lasted a couple of years. Because of leadership, group roles, and responsibilities, group dynamics, communication styles, closeness, how decisions were made, and how conflicts were handled, we were able to see how groups work together and, more importantly, what makes a great band. Even though One Direction is no longer a band, they were beneficial parts of their relationship that can be looked at in order to learn how group works together. Bands are extremely complicated, as we have seen, and there are many factors that allow a group to function as one to either become successful or a failure. We hope you enjoyed listening to our presentation. Here are our references and sources.